the Coda, the Standard, the 505, Viewpoint, the Laurel, Theory, the Rosie. It feels like there's a new student-focused housing development on every corner of every university town. Great, more housing during a housing crisis. But much of the criticism of these developments comes down to one word:
elevate. Modern want to live elevate. Next upgrade.
Luxury. Over half of all four-year university students in the US live independently in off-campus housing, and that has become increasingly dominated by luxury accommodations. These new buildings feature fancy names, flashy amenities, and student-focused marketing, and they seem to be multiplying. So why do these buildings keep getting built? And what are their impacts on residents, other students, and the communities they stand in? Student preferences are, of course, an important factor in new housing projects. One survey found that people would pay an average of $85 more per month just to live off campus. And over half of the respondents said their ideal building is a mid or high-rise apartment complex in a modern style. Students rated large kitchens, big closets, and most of all, multiple bathrooms as their most important design features in an apartment. As a result, it can be hard to find a place without a pool or spa, smart TVs, or fewer bathrooms than beds, which leads to one obvious downside. Rents are going up. It's not uncommon to see luxury apartments priced at upwards of $2,000 per month per bedroom, which can put a big strain on families and even lead to lower income students being priced out of their education entirely. Between 11 and 19% of four-year students are housing insecure. And at public four-year institutions, students now budget on average 15% more for room and board than for tuition itself. That's great news if you're a developer. As one analyst put it, student housing is a prime, value-added opportunity with explosive growth and tremendous investment potential. From that perspective, it's obvious to keep building it. The shortage of student housing means most landlords have a built-in tenant pool, guaranteeing rents for the academic year, and possibly the entire year, as students look to safeguard their home for the following year, even if they aren't physically there in the summer. Additionally, a student's eviction carries much more weight than it might for a regular tenant. Students would not want to jeopardize their education by not paying rent or throwing wild parties. Or, as a more blunt investor put it, student housing is for-profit work. This phenomenon is not brand new. In June of 2001, residents of the Garden Springs Mobile Home Park in Athens, Georgia, were notified that the land under their feet had been sold. As is often the case with manufactured homes, residents owned the buildings themselves, but not the land they stood on. Located just a mile down the road from the University of Georgia, it was the perfect place to develop the Lodge of Athens, a gated, luxury student housing development. The result was the displacement of 101 low-income families and the dispersion of a diverse, working-class community, 90% of whom were Hispanic or Black. Not every one of these developments is the Lodge, but when looking at these types of buildings, one thing seems to come to mind for many: gentrification. But urban scholars have an even more specific term for this process. Studentification is defined as the transformation of traditional residential areas by an influx of students, leading to rising rents, changes in commercial infrastructure, and increased tensions between students and long-term residents. The effects of studentification are wide-ranging, but all stem from the fact that students have very different needs and uses for housing than long-term residents. For example, most PBSAs remain at a very low occupancy rate over the summer, leaving local businesses and community services to work around the sudden rises and falls in demand. Student-specific or niche businesses can also crowd out local storefronts, stranding even more residents without access to services that might otherwise be available. The replacement and displacement of community members is particularly pronounced in smaller cities and towns, but its effects have been shown across North America. However, given all of these factors, there is another question to consider. Are purpose-built student accommodations helping alleviate the overall housing crisis? The answer is yes, but there's more to it. Migration chains are the mechanism where higher income residents move to new developments, opening up older and cheaper housing for people of lower incomes. It has been consistently shown that adding to the housing supply leads to lower rents and more open units across all price ranges. However, that only goes so far. Every 100 market rate units opens up the equivalent of only 40 units in the poorest neighborhoods, and that is only if an area is not already struggling with high vacancy rates and deterioration, where new units do little to drive the market. Student apartments exacerbate this issue because they are not leaving previous mid and low-income housing, but rather other college neighborhoods and on-campus dorms in favor of these new buildings. So what's next? Do we stop the construction, tear down all of these buildings, and send everyone packing? That's obviously not the answer either. I think it's important to remember how much housing is tied to our identities. These luxury buildings may fulfill many of our modern society's wants and desires, but our housing should reflect the diversity inherent to an institution for higher learning. I don't think it's helpful to be pro or anti these new luxury student housing developments, but it is important to understand how they are affecting the urban fabric of our universities. College campuses, these almost sacred bastions of independence and growth, are starting to feel the same corporate encroachment that is so common in the rest of our lives, and I don't think that's a great thing. The challenge, then, is finding a balance between affordability, convenience, community, and, yes, luxury that can work for everyone.